Welcome to Compose Yourself, the podcast where academic writing meets self-discovery for the students at the Chicago School.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Cindy.
Whether you're crafting your first essay or refining your voice as a writer, we're here to guide you through the art of composition.
From brainstorming to final drafts, we'll break down the tools and techniques to help you think critically, write effectively, and express yourself with confidence.
So, grab a pen, open your mind, and
compose yourself. Welcome to the Module 1 podcast. This week, we're going to be discussing what we're up to in these podcasts and how we think they're going to be really helpful in this course, and the purpose and method behind research proposals, and then how we kind of go about reading research articles with a few simple techniques and ideas. So, Jason, why don't you start off by telling me what you think was so helpful about the podcasts in the English 100 course and why you thought, hey, we better carry that through in English 200.
I mean, the short and sweet of it is the feedback. The number of students that reached out to me and said, I really loved the podcast because they gave me a different way of engaging with the material. Right? You have those traditional readings, which you still need to do. You have your assignments, the assignment sheet videos, which are kind of more formal and instructional, but they just loved how it was a conversation and an exploration of the different topics that we cover throughout the course. So I don't see, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I think students also really liked that we occasionally didn't think the same way on a topic.
Right,
we
right.
played off of each other and we both could support what we thought, but we're very different. We're very different readers and writers. We're very different in our backgrounds for this discipline. So I feel like students also picked up on that you're not always looking for the right way. You're looking for the way that's working for you when it comes to academic reading and academic writing. So I think that also really helped, that there's some contrast between the way that I see something and the way that you see something.
Right, right. And none of us are Ben Stiller standing in front of a, classroom, dryly speaking. And it's just for fun, just talk
Yeah,
about it.
I agree. So one of the things we want to talk about today is as research proposals, kind of more broadly as what's the purpose of them and why are we doing research proposals in our course? So I think one of the things we want to talk about when we think about research proposals is the idea of exploring before you choose a topic. So in this class, we're going to be asking our students to spend 7.5 weeks reading about, researching about, writing about one topic. And that is a huge commitment to a topic. So obviously, we're going to want them to be very interested in their topic. I've written some pretty long papers and projects in my academic career. And the thing that enabled me to get those projects done was deep personal interest in the topic, because that has to be some driving force, because at the end of the day, when you have to really go after something for a long time, just the grade at the end sometimes isn't enough to keep you very engaged. So I think this proposal thing gives you a little project at the beginning to think about, okay, I'm interested in a few things. I'm going to explore them a little bit. Then I'm going to pick one and write a proposal and see, do I think I can stay engaged in this for 7 weeks? What are your thoughts on this, Jason?
I mean, I almost go back to last season when we talked so much about how writing is a process. So is researching, right? And so I think that this kind of exploratory form of writing at the very, very beginning is a part of that process. It's kind of like an active form of brainstorming. It lets you, test a few different things, tread the waters before, diving in deep. And so I've always appreciated that. I've always liked allowing myself to get into the topic instead of just waiting till the very end. You take some of those classes and then it's, hey, 15-page paper due next week. Good luck. And you kind of stare at that blank page and say, what do I do? How do I even begin? So I really think that the research proposal is beneficial in that way. It gives them kind of a little less risk to help get them started.
I agree. I think there are times too, I can remember in undergrad, if it's just go pick a topic, it can be really almost too much freedom. So I feel like one
Right.
thing we've really tried to do in our design is narrow the scope at least a little bit and then give some resources for how to start that exploration, like with some of the library resources
Right.
that we're bringing in to make it maybe not so intimidating. Like the whole world is not your oyster. You need to pick something that's sort of in the field that you want to go into with this degree program. So I feel like freedom to choose your project is important because you have to stay engaged, but also too
Right.
much freedom can be really overwhelming when choosing a topic. So, um, what are your thoughts about that? Have you ever had like that experience where the instructor's like, just pick a topic, and you're like, whoa.
Any topic. Well, that's the moment that you wait after class and you're standing in a line of 10 other students ahead of you. What about this topic? What about this topic? What about this topic? And even the teacher looks like they're pulling their hair out, like, just go, just do it. So, I think the flip side of that too, or another addition, is that they're going to get feedback on this,
Right.
right? Like their instructor is going to say, hey, you're headed in the right direction. This looks good. Or, ooh, hey, early warning signs. So that piece of feedback is going to be really, really important. And I mean, I think if I had gone through this, I would have felt more assured or more confident going into the writing project, just having that feedback, having that conversation with your instructor in a little more formal way, but still a little lower risk environment.
I think that's true. I also think so. We're asking them to do this research proposal, which means they're going to be committing to a project. They're going to be doing a lot of research on this
Right.
topic. They're going to be asked to start building, references lists, and they're going to be doing a lot of projects throughout the term that lead up to this paper that they're writing at the end, which means they're going to be doing a lot of academic reading in this class,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So I
Welcome to
think,
college.
right. And so this can be a big leap for some students. And I think what we've talked about, and I think this helpful conversation that we can have is strategies that can help our students really think about active academic reading, some strategies to help them kind of get through this more difficult reading that they're going to be doing. And I say that as an ongoing student too. I mean, we're both lifelong learners. You're never done learning how to write. You're never really done learning strategies for active reading and for staying engaged while you're reading. So,
Right.
what are some strategies that you think students can benefit from when they're trying to read a difficult text?
I really think, I mean, we need to distinguish between, you used the word a couple of times, but between active reading and passive reading.
Yeah.
And I think we're all familiar with passive reading. It honestly, in my, unscientific opinion, it's probably the majority of the reading we do, whether we're scrolling on our phones or maybe, we're browsing through a magazine at the doctor's office or whatever it is, you just kind of you're reading the words, but your mind is kind of shifting. It's in and out. You're, maybe picking up a few things, but then your cat threw up and you run over and clean it up, or you're just not really in the text. It's just something you're kind of doing. And the problem with that is that once you get to these really difficult academic articles, you cannot passively read them because you're going to be required to understand this information and synthesize it and support the claims with quotes or paraphrases and citations here and there. And so you really have to wrestle with the text, which is kind of something we talked about last season, which means that you need to be an engaged, active reader. And we'll keep talking about maybe some strategies in some future episodes. But I think one of the biggest ones for now is take some notes or do some annotations on the text. As you're reading, don't highlight everything, but maybe if you see something that causes you to ask a question, write it down in the margins. Or if you see something that says, "Oh, this is really interesting. I might want to follow up on this," then, highlight that little sentence. Just doing that alone allows you to be more active and engaged with the text. Like what are some strategies then that you've used? Like how do you keep yourself present in what you're reading?
Well, I think the first thing is I always try to think about how long is the thing that I need to read and how much time do I have in a day. So, when I was working through my reading for when I was in classes that required reading, I would look at that day and say, okay, I have this amount of time today, but tomorrow I have a little bit more time. So I would try to set goals for that reading because there's something called reading stamina where it's like, we almost don't have as much as we would like if we spend a lot of our time scrolling on our phone or sort of passively reading as we're looking at
Mhm.
social media or whatever. And then our brain, when we have to sit down with a very dense, longer text, is quite easily cognitively overwhelmed by that, I think. So we have to sort of understand that that's a situation and build up to longer reading sessions. So for me, I'm all about the Pomodoro method. So if I was having a hard, which just means timing yourself. So
Mhm.
for me, if I'm having a hard time with reading stamina, I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes and I'm going to read for 20 minutes and then give myself a 5-minute break. I'm going to do that 2 or 3 times and then I'm going to take a longer break or be done for that day.
Right.
So I try to work those things in, like those little tricks, telling myself you get a break, you get to walk away for a little bit or whatever, especially if it's a more difficult text. Um, I also try to make sure that I look at things I don't know. So if there are if there are words being used and I need to look up a definition or something like that, that actually helps me stay engaged because I I'm a curious person. I think human beings are naturally curious. So if you can find something to be curious about in what you're reading, I really do think that goes a long way. So do you have any other tips, especially as it pertains to like being curious about your reading and kind of reading as inquiry?
I mean, I think again, it just goes back to that knowing that you need to be active in your reading and keeping that at the forefront of your mind. I am easily distracted. Everybody I know is easily distracted, and if you don't put yourself in that right headspace, you're not going to get it done. So, for example, my I have a friend, and he can read while listening to music that has words or lyrics, and it works for him. It's fine. In fact, he'll even say like, "I'm going to read until this album is done." And so he kind of has almost that Pomodoro method that's built in. I cannot do that. It distracts me. I start listening to the lyrics and then I don't know what I'm reading. So I think just exploring yourself, knowing yourself, and doing what works best for you. If it is too loud at your house, your kids are running around playing, or something's going on, then go to a library, or read out at a park, or read late at night, or I mean, I got in grad school, I had to do so much reading that my eyes bled. Um, and I did it in the mornings, really early, 5, 6 a.m. The house was quiet, my warm cup of tea, and that kind of just primed me to be ready to go.
Yeah, I
You just
think
have to know.
finding those strategies that work for you and knowing yourself are so, so important. I agree with that.
You're
I
all
also
different.
think another strategy we could kind of throw out there is um, using AI appropriately when you're reading. So, like, let's say recently I read something and there were a couple of terms that the writer was assuming you already knew what these things were. They were like theories or something, and I didn't know what they were. This is a new topic of research for me. So I actually worked with AI, ChatGPT actually, and I just said, gave it those two terms and said, "Can you explain these to me?" As a new somebody who's explain this to somebody who's never read anything about this, and I'll also find it helpful to like ask it to suggest some foundational readings about those things, so that if I want to, I can go
Nice.
further and find those things, and that's a really helpful way. Like, gone are the days of pulling out the dictionary, and looking up a word or whatever,
A what?
especially
What's that?
since some of these terms are not going to be in a regular dictionary. So I think that's a really helpful way to leverage AI to help you with academic reading while not relying on it too heavily and missing the development of your own reading stamina and the development of your own active reading skills. So I think
I
that's
agree.
one way students can do it without sort of sidestepping their own development because they will need that development all the way through their program. Um, Another
Which
tip we've talked,
is, oh,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. No, jump in.
I was just gonna say that, that made me think that academic articles are also just not written like normal readings. Right? And you don't read them the same way that you would read normal readings.
So true. Yes, talk about that. Say more.
Well, it's kind of like, if there is a little bit of a similarity. So academic articles have something called an abstract, that we're going to have students look over. But that kind of reminds me of the old days of going to the bookstore and looking at the blurb of a book.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to sit there at a bookstore and say, "Ooh, which really engaging sci-fi thriller am I going to read?" And then you just pick it up, read the whole book in the bookstore. Like, absolutely not. So you would turn, you look at the blurb, you read a little bit about it, and it gives you a sense of, would this interest me or not? And that's kind of what abstracts do as well for academic articles. It's a short little blurb about a paragraph long, and it tells you, hey, what's the main idea? What is it that we were researching? How did we do this research? What did we find out? What's the big deal, the significance of that? So you can kind of get all of the major sections or parts, because there aren't spoilers, right? This isn't fiction. And that's a really helpful way to save you a lot of time and headache. Because can you imagine? I mean, how many articles, like when you reflect back on times you had to go find articles, what did you do? Did you read all of them? Did you ever feel maybe overwhelmed by how much research there was? Or
Well, I mean, if you just go like do a search through the library's databases, the overwhelm begins immediately when you get like
Mhm.
5,000 articles to look at and weed through. The great news is there are ways to work with the library's resources to make that less overwhelming. But as a
Spoiler
young
alert.
undergrad, I probably didn't do that. And so I was immediately overwhelmed because there's so much to look at. So you are correct. Reading the abstract, I love this sort of this example you're giving of like reading the back of a book to see, do I want to read this? Is this something I'm interested in? It's exactly like that. And it also usually will give you like key terms. It'll have like a
Oh,
keywords
yeah.
guide. So if you find an article that really fits the topic that you want to explore, you could look at those key terms and maybe use those as search terms. You
It's a
could
good idea.
use, you could look at that article and use those search terms and like understand pretty quickly if it's going to fit what you're looking for. But it's also just like a good way to maybe start right out of the gate. Do I know all of these terms? Are these things that I'm going to need to look up and get some background on? So I think the abstract and the key words sections are so helpful to sort of weeding through everything that you're going to come up with when you're starting your research. Um,
Do you think it's only useful at the beginning of research, though? Like what other
no.
uses do you think abstracts might have, or benefits, or
I think one way that you can engage with it too is like after you read it, after you read the article, sort of returning to the abstract and then looking at that and saying, okay, based on this abstract, do I understand what they were summarizing?
it's a good
Do
idea.
can I look at it and say more? So usually the abstract's gonna be like a high level summary of what the article's about. But when I'm done reading, I ought to understand things that are a bit more granular about that article, right? They're going to summarize
Right,
their
right.
findings in like one sentence. Can I say more about their findings? And does it link directly to what I need to talk about in my own paper or in my own research? So doing that
And that
sort
way
of like
then
post reading can help you reflect and then solidify what you learned from that paper.
so almost like active reading and reading stamina combined by doing that kind of post-reflection, right? Like you are number one, making sure because sometimes you just have to do it. You're going to have to read the articles. That's the nature of school. Maybe your reading stamina isn't up to snuff yet, but you made it over the finish line. So that's a good way to test and to see, yeah, am I retaining this information? Am I building up that stamina to finish and to comprehend in an active way? So I really love that as a test in a way. Like, not a you're getting graded test, but as a testing for yourself, is giving yourself that information to check your own knowledge, check your understanding. And I love that idea.
I think it checks your recall a little bit. It's a way of trying to leverage that your brain does better when it has some reflection time and it's trying to
Mhm.
encode some new information. So if you kind of give your brain what it needs, it tends to do better work for you. So we're proposing all of these strategies, this active reading and reading abstracts first and circling back and developing reading stamina and reflecting on what you read, because our students are going to read a lot in this class to support their arguments. They're going to do a lot of researching in the next couple of weeks to try to pull together the resources that they need to support the arguments and on the research that they're going to be doing. So I feel like hopefully these strategies might assist them as they're trying to sort of develop these references lists and engage with this reading in the course. Any
Absolutely.
last thoughts
Absolutely.
about the reading strategies before we close out today?
I mean, again, just research is a process. So know yourself, but I think, have a little humility. Give yourself some grace, and it's going to be a struggle, but, nothing hard was ever easy, or whatever that saying is. I don't know. Like, you're not going to get this overnight, right? Like, this is a challenge. This is something that is really going to push you to your limits. So know that and be okay with it, because we're going to, walk with you the entire journey.
Right. And in the spirit of having it not be totally overwhelming and hard and difficult outside the scope of what we can do, we're going to support our students as much as we can, starting
Right.
with next week. We're going to have a special guest on the podcast.
Ooh.
And that guest is really going to talk with us about the library's resources and how to support our students as they do this research, maybe for the first time. So I'm really excited to talk with
That's going to
that
be
special
awesome.
guest. Yeah. So next time.
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Compose Yourself.
Remember, writing is a process, and every word you write brings you closer to becoming the writer you want to be.
We hope you enjoyed today's discussion and that it makes clearer the topics you're exploring in this course. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to your instructor.
Until next time, keep thinking critically
And always compose yourself.